Hello and welcome, everyone. Did you know that only 26% of employees feel psychologically safe at work? So, while I'm not surprised by this number, I am actually kind of ashamed. This is not what we're intending to do as leaders within the workspace. So, but what does psychological safety even actually mean? Well, psychological safety is not built on buzzwords or swag, at onboarding or even anonymous suggestion boxes. That starts to build rapport, but it doesn't start to create or cultivate an environment of psychological safety. It starts with intentional actions. So, good day, everyone. I am Christina Green and your generational translator in the workplace. And today we are talking about how to build psychological safety and not just talk about it. All right, let's get into it. So, 63% of workers don't feel safe sharing their opinions at work. And 60% say that they can't be themselves at work. Now, this is according to the Mental Health America. Psychological safety is about how people feel, how they feel how they feel when they speak up, when they take risks, when they ask questions, or even when they admit to their mistakes. Are they safe in this space to do any of these things? Now, in doing all of this without the fear of punishment, of ridicule, or possibly even being labeled. And every generation has a different threshold for what this feels like or what feels safe to them. And that's why we're here today to talk about this, is because psychological safety can be built. It is built at the individual leader, at the team level, and individually with one on one with your teammates. So, we're going to talk about what this looks like across the generations and how to lean into each of them. Right now, of course, I always say the disclaimer that everyone is an individual. Our generations is just another tag, if you will, another way to try to understand one another. That is not the end all be all. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about what psychological safety is and what it's definitely not. Now, this is not an inclusive list, but this is to understand a bit more about what it actually feels like. So, psychological safety is not about coddling people. This is not about, stroking their ego or, really kind of blowing smoke. This is not smoke and mirrors. This is not about avoiding accountability, right? When performance is performance, but this is about treating people as humans. This is not about being overly soft, right? You don't need kick gloves. You don't need to, white gloves on this one. This is not about tiptoeing and dancing around accountability, around performance issues. What this is, it's about trusting that your voice won't cost you your credibility, that you can have a voice in that space and be able to present it in a way that is, of course, still respectful, but how they feel about whether or not there are going to be repercussions or consequences to the things that they share, right? To being honest. And I'm not talking about being hurtful. I'm talking about being honest and constructive in the workplace. It's about knowing that you won't be punished for being human, right? We are all human. We're not robots. And how we show up to do the work, it's not always perfection. No one is perfect. And so if we allow our humanness to get in the way and to be punished for that, then people are going to pull back, right? So psychological safety is also feeling like you belong without feeling like you have to leave a part of yourself at home, without code switching or over explaining, right? This is about feeling confident in being able to know that your views, your opinions will be received in a way that they were intended. And this is a skill that's developed over time, both on the teammate and the leadership's level, in order to be able to communicate and have this banter, if you will, within the team, to be able to be collaborative and constructive, that is productive in the work environment. Psychological safety is allowing your humanness to be an attribute and not a flaw. Now, what others come to mind that are not on this list that maybe are part of some of your experiences? So lean into thinking about the times when you felt safe to speak up and other times when you did not. when you did not feel like your voice was clearly heard, received, or even welcomed in that space. Now, here's some of the problems is that we tell people that, hey, you can speak up. Say what it is that's on your mind. What are your thoughts? Share your insights. But that's not what builds safety, right? Just because by saying those words, if there's no actions behind them that are supporting them, then it's going to be empty. If we have inconsistent behaviors, then that just diminishes the trust. Because foundationally behind psychological safety is the ability to trust, especially to trust your leadership, to trust those who are receiving this vulnerable side of you, because you are sharing things that you may not always. And I'm not talking about pouring out your heart and bringing your personal life to work. That's not what this is. This is about creating the space in a work environment, right? For the work that you're doing, the expertise that you've gained and you're continuing to grow in, to have a safe space to be able to learn, to make those mistakes, to also to be successful, right? And to practice that humility as well as that ability to be proud of yourself for your achievements. When there is no safety, then people learn to stay small. They learn to just do their job, right? To just, tick off the boxes as a checklist instead of being more innovative. They learn to be quiet and not share their ideas. And whether or not this is something that they've experienced directly, if they've seen others get shut down or to share ideas that were never followed up on, then they learn to silence their voice in that space. And you're actually stifling their growth because they don't feel safe to share. And they start to create their own safety by themselves and or commiserating, if you will, with fellow colleagues, either on the team or somewhere in the organization, or bringing this work home, right? Or bringing some of these challenges home. So this is not what we want. Psychological safety isn't built in a keynote in just a one-time delivery of some heartfelt messages. It's built in how we respond to feedback from our teams about how it is that we can improve a process, how we can even be stronger or better leaders, how we can lean into the mistakes that we make, and how we show up as leaders when we make a mistake. Do we take accountability? It's about our vulnerability, each and every day. How are we approaching our own journey, right, within our teams, within the organization, and welcoming our teammates to also do the same thing, right? To be vulnerable, to be able to make mistakes without there being a saloon door that's just going to hit them in the back on the way in. Okay. Now, what's one hangup you have about creating psychological safety on your team? What is that barrier to actually welcoming this conversation, this collaboration, to bringing in people to be, being humble as leaders and welcoming others to share in this space? So, I want you to think about what is one hangup, one barrier that is actually preventing you from really diving into creating this psychological safety on your team. Now, why do I care so much about this intergenerational communication, right? As many of you have seen, I spend a lot of time talking about this and how we can bring the generations together within the workplace. Well, as a Gen X leader, I have followed the playbook. I have done what I was told, push through, just keep it professional. Don't bring your full self to work. I followed that playbook. And behind the scenes, people, they were shutting down, they were burning out, they were disengaging, they were holding back. And that's when I realized is because we weren't creating this culture of trust. This was all based on performance. It was all based on fear. It was all based on this quiet resentment that people had for various levels of leadership. Psychological safety isn't something that you offer. It's something that you have to build. You have to build towards on your team with every moment and in every conversation, because your team is looking for leadership, and strong leadership leads with empathy. Now I get to help organizations build this generationally intelligent teams that are specific to their companies, that start to leverage and appreciate their teammates. A team where honesty isn't punished and where trust is built on more than just words. And people are not afraid to be real. They they bring their full selves into that space, and the organizations benefit from that. Because when people feel safe to show up fully, they don't just contribute, they collaborate and they lead. This is how you foster an environment that builds your leadership pipeline. Okay, so now let's start to break down the generational rules, if you will, these unspoken rules that are governing psychological safety for each generation in the workplace. We're going to dive into what types of interactions actually feel safe across the generations because they are very different. And what are some of those red flags for each generation when it comes to feeling safe, right? What they've learned to and also to what they have learned to trust from their leadership. What are the cues and the signs that they're looking from their leaders in order to feel safe in that environment? All right. So going left to right. So boomers, what feels safe to them is a sense of stability, an ability to be able to understand and anticipate what is coming day to day. Consistency from their leadership, right? What can they anticipate? So, consistency and strategy, consistency and how their leaders are supporting and or weighing in on various topics, on initiatives, on programs, on the direction of the organization and how they fit into it. And then loyalty, just an appreciation for their contribution because boomers tend to stay in their roles longer because one that's and you've heard me talk about this before because that's how their generation has been shaped within the corporate environment. What feels unsafe to them or a red flag is when they face public criticism. I will tell you, this is, I think, consistent across the entire all generations, right? You always hear me say that everyone is an individual first, but where they are within their generation, these are cues or clues to understand how to interpret them. Now, the public criticism, nobody likes to be ridiculed or called out for a mistake or called out is certainly not publicly for anything that could have been done better. So, especially with the boomers, because then they feel that this is disloyal or this is not recognizing or acknowledging their contributions overall. Now, they also too don't enjoy when expectations seem to be changing with no clarity, right? If if the decisions is a revolving door around the work that they are doing, this feels unstable and feels like something that they should not commit their time to. This is a red flag, and this could be a red flag across every generation, right? But boomers also too can read this a bit easier because they've been in the workforce longer. They've been there, done that. They've seen it. They've experienced the layoffs. They know what this feels like. So they'll feel unstable in this type of situation. Now, what are the leadership the signals that leadership can give them that will help them to feel more safe in this space? Is a respectful tone, right? They will tell you that they are not about today's jargon, right? The shorthand and even just the communication, how it is that you choose to communicate, right? Boomers are really great. Just pick up the phone, have a conversation with them, because there's a lot to be gained by understanding tone and hearing inflection, right, in a conversation, right? So speak to them with respect, as you would anyone, but especially with boomers. This is what they are listening for. One of the first things that they are listening for. They're also too listening for clear expectations and a follow through. So when they have been assigned, when they have received a charge to take on initiative, to lead programs, to lead a strategy, whatever this is, they're looking for clear expectations so they know how to measure success. Okay, now, moving on to Gen X, what feels safe for them, right? Is the autonomy. What we understand about Gen X is that they tend to be very independent, right? Yes, they can collaborate. That's not the issue. They tend to be very independent, very resilient, and they're go-getters. They take pride in doing a good job. So they're looking for the autonomy to be able to take the lead and make decisions about the work that they are doing. They're looking there, or what feels safe is competence in their leaders, right? Now, this does not mean that you're as a leader, you have to know their job better than they do, but it's also to a respect, right? The competence in understanding that there is a frontier on the knowledge that you have about the work that they do. You do not need to know it down to their level, right? And they feel safe when they are self-sufficient. When they know that they can rely on themselves, they have done something over time and they have developed their tools and resources to support it. That creates a sense of safety for them, psychological safety. And as a leader, reinforcing these things and supporting them with these things is how it is that you help them to thrive, right? And to really thrive in the work that they're doing. Now, what is a red flag is this idea of micromanagement. They cannot manage this. And across all generations, nobody likes to be micromanaged, right? Maybe someone newer in their career, they don't see it as quickly, but certainly boomers and Gen X, they will see micromanagement as a lack of trust, a lack of respect for their experience, and this will just drive them up the wall. Now, interestingly enough, is that Gen X says, and I'll say this as a Gen X, well, as a Zennials Gen X, is that we also too tend to feel that we are best at doing this thing, and relying on ourselves to get it done. And so sometimes we lean in to be that micromanager. And so this is an opportunity as well, but we do not like to be micromanaged or to be um, uh, over handled, if you will, right, with the work that we're doing. Also to emotional manipulation, just please leave this one alone, right? Don't do the guilt trip thing. And a lot of this exists because we bring our personal selves, if you will, into the corporate environment, right? So how it is that if we have family dynamics, if we have siblings, we also too tend to bring that dynamic into how it is that we lead within the workplace. And so a red flag for Gen X is that don't leave the manipulation alone. This is not about shaming someone or guilting someone into doing something, into taking on a project. This is about allowing them to have the autonomy to be able to make those decisions, right? Give them information, the clear expectations, so they can make those decisions. All right. Now, what are the signals from leadership that they trust? Is transparency, right? They don't need smoke and mirrors. They do not need to be told one thing and another thing exists, right? No manipulation. Be transparent about what's going on, right? About where you are. If decisions are changing, if things are moving differently than expected, if things have been deprioritized, be transparent with them. Share with them. They do not like to waste their time because they pour everything that they have into the work that they do, right? There's a lot of pride in doing a good job. Also, too, non-invasive check-ins. So these are when leaders are leaning in too far, right? So there's a difference between micromanagement and just checking in to catch the pulse, right, of what's going on with the things that they're doing. This is not about asking probing questions that are getting down to specifically how it is that they are tackling. Remember, leadership is being bought into the what needs to be done. The how is being led by those who are leading it, right? And so it's extending that trust. You've built the rapport. Now building the psychological safety and or the trust is by knowing that they have it handled. Okay. So and then also too, when there's clear rationale, when they can be bought into the process to understand why something is a priority or why something has been deprioritized. Help them understand that. They are not children, no one is a child in the workplace, and so but give extend them that courtesy of explaining the rationale. That is going to be the why that they hang on to, that drives them towards doing a good job. Okay, next, let's get into the Zennials. Zennials are this bridge, right? This smaller generation between Gen X and Millennials, and they serve as a bridge in every way possible, right? Really kind of this glue between all of the elder generations as well as some of the younger generations. Now, what feels safe for Zennials, and I'm a Zennial, right smack dab there in the middle, um, is relevance. When what they are doing is relevant to what it is that the overall strategic goals of the organization. They are very good at making connections. So help them to understand and to see the bigger picture, right? Between the work that they are doing and why it is relevant to today that is driving towards the future. Recognition and nuanced leadership. So they want to be recognized for the work that they are doing, right? Helping them to grow along their career path. That's what feels safe. Somebody who has bought into their career growth. Now, the red flags look like when they are being overlooked, when they are feeling like they are being used, if you will, as a cog within a machine, when they are being lumped into the wrong group, when and not just generationally, but when you think about performance, they do not like to be part of I'll say assumptions, right, that we make about one another and the various groupings that we might place ourselves and or associate one another with. This is that is a red flag immediately, right? Where, people are making overgeneralizations about generations, right? We hear this often, where people speak about entitlement and being lazy and or being outdated and a one-trick pony. All of these terms I have heard people actively use in the workplace, and they just drive barriers in between progress. Now, what are some of the signals that help Zennials to feel like they have trust within their workspace? Well, when their work is personalized, right? Or personalized communication is when there's an acknowledgement for their contribution, and this is their leaders understanding the work and the effort that they're putting into their contributions to the organization, to the team success. And also to flexible leadership. When you have, and this isn't about just letting people go early on Fridays, right? Or extending PTO. This is about treating people like professionals, right? And having some flexibility. When you have good HR policies and guidelines, they are helping leaders to know the boundaries or the guardrails to be able to work within. But Zennials are appreciative of having some flexibility at the leader level with being able to practice some autonomy within their team. How it is that they are able to support the individuals that are on their team with creating some flexibility. And this isn't just about taking time off for a sick kid. This is also too about recognizing when people need to step away for their own mental space, right? And this does not have to be a severe problem when I'm having an issue and a breakdown. This is saying, no, I know myself well enough to know that after I complete a project, I need to take a day off because it was a lot of effort put into that. And emotionally, I've got to be able to recharge. Okay. So those are just examples. All right, let's keep going. Let's move on to millennials. What feels safe for millennials is authenticity, right? And this is at the leadership level, but also too at the teammate level, is that they feel that not only can they be authentic in their environment, but that their team is also doing the same. That they are showing up in a way that is bringing their full selves to work. That this is not about being somebody that you're not, that they are in fact celebrated for bringing that authenticity into the workplace. And also too feedback loops, providing them with information to help them to understand how to continue to improve. Remember, millennials in many ways are on a growth path. They're on a career journey, so they're growing in their career, and they want to know how to get to the next level. They want to know how to be, better, if not the best, at the work that they're doing. Now, whether or not that is getting into leadership or just excelling in their field, right? So being able to have that feedback, especially with their leadership that is constructive, that is a way to build trust with them. And also too to be included, be part of decision making, right? And this isn't singling them out, but this is also to bringing them into understanding, pulling the veil back. Oftentimes there's this great veil between leadership and between frontline staff, and nobody understands what's happening. It's almost like it's the Wizard of Oz, right? It's behind the veil. Nobody knows what's going on. Transparency, right? Inclusion, helping them understand how decisions are made, and even also to how things are prioritized, and why even good ideas or good decisions don't always win when it's all said and done. So, being transparent in this process. Now, what feels like a red flag is when their feedback is completely ignored, but with the caveat that there's no follow through. There's no explanation about why that feedback was perhaps maybe not timely, or maybe just could not be part of the decision moving forward. Okay. Or even passive aggressive control. Nobody likes passive aggressive, um, uh, practices in the workplace, not from leaders, not from colleagues. This is just a terrible practice. Don't bring this part of yourself to work. And if you are part of this, I would tell you to be self-aware. Understand how it is that you are, because passive aggressive breeds manipulation. And that's not, that has no place in the workplace. So, okay. Now, what are some signals from leadership that help them to feel safe, psychologically safe, or build that there is trust within the workspace? Is honest conversations, right? It's not about being hurtful or harmful. It's about being honest, and honest means constructive, right? It's providing the truth, but also to delivering it in a way that is also to considering the human that's on the receiving end of that honesty, right? It's growth-based support and clear boundaries. So helping them to achieve different levels or different achievements throughout their career journey, and doing so in a way that is constructive, and setting clear boundaries, right? Not everyone can do everything. So be upfront about, different role distribution throughout your team. Now, we work within a job description, of course, but there's also too flexibility to move and take on different projects or be part of other initiatives that are outside of their scope of work, right, or in their job description. These are opportunities, and to help them to see where they can be flexible and taking on some of those opportunities. That is how they start to feel that there's trust within that workspace. Okay, now next, lastly, is Gen Z. Gen Z feels safe in the work environment when they feel like they belong. They feel like they have a seat at the table, that this is not about sitting, if we use the Thanksgiving table, this is not about being at the kids' table, right? That is dismissive, and it defeats everything that you're working towards as a leader. It's about feeling like they belong and they have a voice at that table, right? That this isn't just about being a kid at the big table. This is about being an equal member, sitting in that table, even a round table, if you will, right? Where there's no hierarchy, there is a value for everyone's voice. About being equitable, and feeling equitable within that team, about emotional intelligence, about being able to people to be self-aware and to understand how it is that they are interacting with one another, right? So we're not being passive aggressive, and we're not trying to manipulate one another, or we're not being overly sensitive, if you will, right, to one group over the other. It's about understanding and striking the balance, right? Emotional intelligence is about understanding one another and having a sense of awareness for ourselves, as well as being curious about one another and their journey, right? Now, what is a red flag for them is performative allyship, where people can just perform their way, regardless of how they get there, in a way that is going to align them with leadership, right? That will just be a glide path into promotions. That is a major red flag, and it's one we've seen very often in the corporate environment, where it's kind of a sister, if you will, to nepotism, where we're taking others under our wing, and or allowing those to perform very high in order to continue to be promoted, as opposed to supporting equity across one another, across the team, where people are having an opportunity to, excuse me, to go for out for some of those positions, right? To be able to achieve or to climb that ladder, or the ladder which no longer exists. All right. And then also to tone policing, where This is a major red flag for them if they're always being corrected or being called out for the tone that they are using, right, in the corporate space. So how it is that they are approaching conversations and interactions and being silenced, being shushed. This is not a welcoming environment for Gen Z. This is a major red flag, and believe me, they will very quickly step out of the way, right, and leave your organization. Now, here are some signals that from leadership that they know that there's trust there. Now, leaders who name the issues directly and they show the receipts. Now, they understand what's going on, and they're also too, even if the leader is the one who has made the mistake, maybe we made a bad call, bad decision, that they're willing to name these issues, right? To call them out, to say it like it is, as opposed to now, of course, still being constructive, right? Because this is not about damaging the organization or the reputation. This is about being constructive because in order to do so, you can be honest about what the issue is, as well as and take accountability where there's necessary. And then using that as information as a platform to be able to move forward, right? To redesign the strategy for how it is that you approach resolving some of those issues. This is a clear sign of trust for Gen Z because taking accountability, having transparency behind the issues, being direct about what these issues are and how we can build a bridge moving forward, all of this speaks to a high emotional intelligence, right? And this is a major, major green flag for Gen Z. All right. Now, as you can see, we're going to all experience the same workplace, but have very different uh, um, ideas of what safety feels like, what it looks like, and even those red flags across the generations. Now, so you can see if you are adopting a one size fits all approach, you are going to lose the trust and eventually your best talent because across the board, every generation has a threshold that they are checking for or of whether or not they're going to continue to be bought into your leadership as well as the culture within your organization. Now, leaders, here's what building psychological safety actually looks like. And this is not an all inclusive list. So it looks like modeling vulnerability first, right? So something like saying, I missed that, right? Or, well, I'm open to ideas, right? It's being open and hearing and welcoming actually the conversation around maybe where, listen, I don't know all of this. I don't know everything there is to know about this. And I would love to hear your insights. It's about welcoming it. It's about viewing the mistakes, even your mistakes, and viewing them as learning opportunities and not necessarily a trigger for shame. It's reacting well when people take risk because when we take risk, that also too means that we feel safe to do so, but we cannot dismiss them or minimize them or punish them if there is a mistake or even if the risk resulted in a success. You don't want to dismiss the behavior for them feeling safe to actually do so. You will immediately shut them down. They will turn into a hermit and go right back into their shell, and you may never see them again, right? It's acknowledging the effort, even if you can't act on the idea. There are great ideas that come out of collaboration, and many of them we just can't resource. Sometimes it has to do with budget. Sometimes it has to do with it'll take us on a path that maybe longer, maybe just unknown, and so maybe there's a decision that the risk of doing so doesn't feel great for the organization, right? But it doesn't mean that it's a bad idea. So it's rewarding the idea, the thought or the effort that they're willing to share the insight openly. That means that you've got great trust on your team. It's about making space for different voices. Now, like providing that round robin feedback, right? So that round table example, letting people weigh in and collaborate in a space and share their insights. Maybe it's about having a one-on-one for some of the people who don't necessarily always speak up. Remember, generations are one thing. These are cues, right, that help us understand each generation, but we are all individuals. And individuals are going to feel differently about speaking up openly in a group, right? Versus how they may feel one-on-one, right? So remember, know your team, know who it is that you are asking to provide input. Don't let the loudest voices or even hierarchy dominate that idea sharing. So just because somebody has a seniority, right, or they have a elevated title within your team does not mean that they have to be the one to always speak. It does not mean that they have to be the one who always wins or their idea wins. Okay. It's about following up and closing the loop, right? So if we if we receive these insights and we do nothing about it, right? It's the I hear you. And if there's no actions that are actually followed up with the idea, then that actually can do worse than never asking in the first place, right? So because there are many decisions, many reasons why we're not able to move forward with something, or that we can, or that it actually needs to take a slightly different shape, right? The idea was the one that actually sparked many that ultimately ended up being what we're doing. It's about being transparent, it's about having the follow through about what happened as a result of that idea. Okay. Let your team know what changed and why, and and or why it didn't, right? So what ultimately led to the decision, the final decisions. When it's all said and done, this is all about transparency. Transparency is going to build your rapport. It's also going to build safety and trust within your team. Also, too, and lastly, adjusting your language across the generations, right? Just as we know, as perhaps as parents, right, we move from, or as a mother, I move from mommy, right, to mom, to somehow to bruh, right? Where this term has come up, it's beyond me. But very similar to how it is that we engage with one another within the organization across the generations. It's a respect level when it comes to honoring the people who are in these positions, and it's more so honoring the life experience that they have, right? And the environment in which they were raised in. You can't speak. I'll say I remember growing up and never being able to call any of my elders by their first name, right? And so that is evolving and different because later generations, we have it where some of their children are calling them their parents by their first name, right? But here is some how to understand how to adjust your language across the generations. So with boomers, you can say and appreciate. Excuse me. Boomers value very much being recognized for their contributions. So you can use language like I value your consistency and your contributions. Let's talk about what needs to evolve, right? You're asking them to weigh in on using their experience to weigh in on something, right? On how it is, on a strategy, on a decision that's going to be made. Perhaps with Gen X, you can say, I trust your instincts, right? Is there anything that feels off here? This is leaning into their expertise and understanding their contribution as well, right? So this is they care very much about being self-reliant. They're very resourceful and they know how to take the lead on many things. You are honoring their experience and their expertise by allowing them to be part of this process. Now, with Zennials, you can say you've got a unique perspective, and what's not being said here that we need to hear, you are recognizing that in many ways they have a line of sight of understanding connections that perhaps maybe missed at some point. And so you're being inclusive by pulling them in with this type of language. How about with millennials? You can say, I want your honest take on this, but what's working and what's not? Millennials have a very innovative view or look into the corporate world. It's to processes that have always existed. And so they need to feel that they are part of the bigger picture, part of performance improvement. And by doing this, by asking this question, you are allowing them to weigh in on a way in a way that helps them to feel bought into their contribution, right? Into their some ownership, if you will, within their organization. Now, with Gen Z, you can ask, what do you need to feel supported right now? Now, this is a question that I would think is very specific to Gen Z. I would not imagine asking this question to boomers. They immediately would see through this and be like, I'm not, listen, I'm not in my 20s, and perhaps be very resistant, as I would assume. But when you lead with this type of question, you're understanding, you're leading with emotional intelligence to recognize that, and this is not about coddling them. This is about how can you help them to be successful, right? Well, what does that support feel like, right? How does that feel? What does it look like right now? And you're giving them an opportunity to be vulnerable in that space and to share with you, here's what I need, and here are the things that I don't know, right? And so, as their leader, this is how you can show up for them in support of them. Now, is any of this easy? Absolutely not, right? This is not going to be easy, but is it worth it? Without a doubt, because the dividends that you receive by leaning into your team, by leaning into and investing into your team and building that rapport and creating that trust, that psychological safety, that is how you get to high performance. That is how you start to get a team that shows up and they show out, that they are very innovative, they are insightful, they come to the stage ready to work. This is not about having distractions because they already feel safe to show up and bring their best self, their most full, true, authentic selves into the workplace. Now, I want you to think about what generation you are finding the most challenging to really kind of create that psychological safety for, or challenging to interact with in the work environment, right? What does that look like for you? What generation are you finding where there's some of that friction? And then think about some of the characteristics, right? The things that make them to feel safe, that maybe the red flags, and what cues can you give them as leaders to feel supported in that in the work environment. Okay. All right. Now, what is the ROI of getting it right? When we get it right, we have higher engagement. And this is not just about an employee engagement survey. This is about people showing up in meetings, being creative and innovative in that space, using their voice, sharing ideas, right? They are faster at problem solving because the distractions, the barriers that are getting in the way of communication, that are getting in the way of them feeling like they can share, then those are slowly starting to be removed, and people are starting to collaborate and show up differently. Excuse me, more fully. You also to have low turnover rate. As we know, when people feel seen and valued, and heard, they start to bring their full selves into work. This makes them to feel happier in their environment, supported by their leaders, and also too, then they won't be looking for other jobs. I mean, this is aside from perhaps maybe any issues regarding compensation, but if everything else is fine, if you've created an environment where they feel like they are trusted, or they can trust you, then you have less turnover, right? Higher retention rates. And then you have a stronger team loyalty. People are being bought in not only to the team, but the work that they are doing, right? That they are part of the change that they want to see, as part of their efforts. Because when people feel safe, they speak up, and they'll do so before it's too late. But if they don't, you'll likely hear about it after they leave, right? Either from an exit interview or from a fellow colleague that they were confiding in, right? Either way, you want to know this information. You want to be proactive as their leader. All right, so let's keep the conversation going, right? Um, but first, I want you to think about what's one thing that you've unconditionally done, or excuse me, that you've unintentionally done in the workplace that might have signaled someone to feel unsafe to speak up in the environment in your workplace, whether you were an individual contributor, perhaps maybe a leader at the time. Listen, No one's perfect and we all say things, right? We all say things that we probably would regret at some point. And it's all part of our learning journey, to moving within our career ladder. We've all done it. We've all been there. And this is if we don't ever learn from it, this is where the problem lies. This is where if we stay there and we don't and we continue to repeat this is where we're going to have continued problems. We'll see this, in our how our leadership does not develop and actually starts to be harmful over our career. And leading a multi-generational team is full of its challenges. As we discussed, these are just how to create psychological safety. But um, sorry, it's about practice, not perfection. It's about being humble and being a servant leader. It's about leading with empathy and how it is that you are showing up with your team and in support of your team, but also to in support of your own career journey. And building psychological safety is a long game. This is not something that happens overnight, but it does start with very small daily shifts. This is how you build the rapport, how it is that you build that trust and cultivate a culture that is intentional as instead of reactionary. You don't need permission to lead differently. You just need the willingness to try. So if you're ready to lead boldly and to do so with a do so generationally aware, understanding the team that you are working with and how it is that they are showing up, let's game plan this together. Use the QR code that's on the screen and let's have a conversation. Let's figure out what this looks like for your team, for your organization. Okay, now next month we've got a heavy hitting list of topics that we're going to be diving into. So we're diving into this mid year hot takes and workplace wake up calls. So everything from how to stop leading as a parent, how to stop raising your teams, and really be the leader that you can be proud of. How to spot that burnout and what that looks like on your team, how to start to balance PTO and productivity and peace as we're going into the summer months, right? We're just a few weeks shy of it. What does this start to look like when people need to start taking time off, right? How to lean in to support those who tend to not take time off, how to support those who are active and using their PTO, how to create this peace and this balance within your team. And then also too, if you've got interns that are coming in, right? New graduates, those who are trying to gain some experience. How can you start to develop them to feel confident to have a voice and contribution within your evolving team? So much to the point where they will consider you for employment and you will consider them. So how do we start to bridge this gap? So these are some hot takes that are coming up for the month of June that I want to make sure to share with everyone so we can all be prepared, so we can all be the best leaders possible. All right. Well, that's all for today. Thank you very much for your time and attention as usual. I am Christina Green, your generational translator in the workplace, and I look forward to connecting with you. In the meantime, you take care, and I'll see you soon.